All
Nice.
right, so today we have Raphael, who I met in Joseph Rodriguez's flow-based prosperity mastermind.
That's right.
And Raphael is a realtor and he's into a bunch of other cool stuff as well. And so, yes, we're just going to kind of see where the conversation flows.
Nice. Yeah, so we were gonna talk. Wait, I'll just put my phone on silent, sorry, so I can be with you
All good.
guys. All right. Yeah, so we were thinking about because we're into kind of the same mm, way of being, let's say, way of evolving into the world. We seek, I believe, similar things in similar ways. So truth, for sure, with the big T.
Yes.
Um, Mystical experiences, I think I could say. But also more simply joy and a good, fulfilling life. So, and we were mentioning the word manifestation earlier
Yes.
and how it can be, maybe it's a little bit overused. So sometimes there's a lot of meaning attached to it that is not always coherent from person to person. So I know I for sure had some negative biases toward the idea. It sounded very woo-woo to me, and just like I associated it a lot with escapism,
Yeah.
like trying to run away from reality. Um, so yeah, did I just wonder if you are you coming from a similar place, or were you maybe a little bit more bathed into those kinds of ideas as a youth, or how
I
was it for you?
actually, I would say probably my introduction to it was like a lot of people, it was learning about the law of attraction
Mm.
and Abraham Hicks. That was
I
probably my,
actually don't know Abraham Hicks.
yeah, so I guess it's a channeled text.
Okay.
So it's Esther. So Esther is basically kind of speaking as Abraham Hicks. And
Mm.
that was kind of my first introduction. And so I think she really like popularized manifestation and I guess talking about manifestation and the law of attraction. And she is very entertaining and very insightful. And so yeah, I still to this day, I definitely value, even though I don't really listen to her as much anymore, I definitely value what she has to say and her approach. But I definitely resonate with what you said about escapism because I think
Mm.
the reason that I gravitated towards these manifestation teachings was escapism.
Ah, that's interesting.
Like I didn't like anything about my life or
Hmm.
myself, and so I looked to manifestation as a way to fix myself in my life.
Hmm.
And so when I first heard about it, I was like, oh wow, there's this like magical tool and
Yeah.
you could just say a few affirmations or do some visualizations and then all of
Mm.
a sudden you're just poof in this new dream reality and
Right. Yeah.
the whole new me is
That is that is the promise.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because it sounds very easy because we
Exactly.
take the whole world of thought, we take for
Mhm.
granted. As in, oh well, if I just say to myself, I just say the words in my head, I am this or I am that,
Mhm.
then like a magic formula, it's gonna just poof
Exactly.
appear.
Hmm.
But obviously, like you probably tried that. I have tried that.
Yes.
Doesn't work.
No.
That's not how it works. So
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot more to it, and it is simple in a way, but it's not easy. It
Yes,
takes time
exactly.
to learn, get into it. I was listening to Neville Goddard earlier,
Hmm.
and he was talking about the law of reversal, right? Which is
Hmm.
essentially that in nature, everything that can go one way can go the other way. So, for example, you can use friction to produce electricity, and you can use electricity to produce friction,
Yes.
right? And so he was saying, well, you can, well, your lived experiences can induce an emotional state, and an emotional state can induce lived experiences. And that is one of the simplest way I have heard the law of attraction
Hmm.
um, to be put, right? Because it's simply if you think feelingly about something, but then it sounds simple, but then it's what does that mean? What does that
Exactly.
imply, right?
Yeah, and I would say it was a few years ago when I learned about probably around 2021 maybe or
Hmm.
2022 when I learned started getting deeper into these teachings, and that's when I
Yeah.
learned about Neville Goddard and the law of assumption. And then
Mm.
it really started to make sense, like on a deeper level. And especially with the law of assumption and this idea that really everything that we're experiencing in our reality is just a reflection of our assumptions.
Right.
And so, for example, if we believe that it's very hard to make money, then that's probably going to be like our dominant experience. And I
Hmm.
say our dominant experience because obviously it's not black and white. Like we're going to have, victories and we're going to have, moments that we might consider failures. And, but dominantly, what our assumptions are tend to be what we experience in our reality.
Yeah.
Or, if we have kind of negative assumptions about relationships, like maybe I think this is especially true for people maybe whose parents were divorced, or maybe their
Mm.
parents fought a lot. And so they think, well, relationships don't work out. And so then that tends to be what they experience in their lives. And so once I
Yeah.
kind of started to see it that way, it started to make a lot more sense.
Mm.
And and recognizing that really we're each kind of like our own universe unto ourselves. And I love, movies and books and or anything creative. And so I think of it as kind of like world building. And
Right.
somebody, like, let's say, like a comic, somebody sits down to write a comic book. And so they're thinking about, okay, what's going to be the tone of my world and what types of
Mm.
characters are going to inhabit my world and what is the genre of my world going to be? Like, is it going to be like
That's
apocalyptic?
interesting because
And
it is the
so,
exercise.
yes. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're all kind of building like our own worlds in a way, and we're all kind of
Hmm.
just experiencing the contents of our own universe.
All right. It's interesting that you bring up, um, you say like it started making sense to you when you started drawing parallels with how your attitudes towards life can affect the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the way you receive certain opportunities. I think that was very much an entry point for me too,
Mhm.
because it's easy. It makes it soothed my rational mind to give it that kind of explanation of like, oh, well, really the way I feel and the way I think are indeed, like, without any doubt, influencing the decisions I make and the way I behave.
Mhm.
And even if for just that, then it makes sense to work on your attitudes toward life and your thought and your emotions in order to make sure that your reality, your physical material reality, goes according to your desires, right?
Exactly.
And I've seen myself do a lot of self-sabotage. It took me a while to even realize I was doing it, right? Because you don't it's sorts of your rational mind would like ignore certain opportunities because you
Mhm.
think that it's impossible, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember a couple of when I was starting as a realtor, a couple of transactions where it was like people were ready to like do a transaction really quick. They were like, I know what I want this, I want that. Like just go for it, no questions asked. Very like too easy, right?
Mhm.
That's what your brain is like. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll help you. And then I would like forget about them or ignore them or something because it's like, well, it was more coherent with my thought pattern, my emotions to go ahead and help the desperate case, the
Mhm.
person that was never gonna buy, the
Mhm.
person that was asking so many questions, but really they were anxious or not serious or something, which is it's all fine, it's all part of the process, right? You're learning.
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing is, the reason why I ignored the opportunity wasn't because of lack of experience exactly. It was because of inadequate attitude of mind.
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. Yes. And I love that you bring that up because that actually reminds me of times when I've missed out on opportunities. And one of the times that I can remember was I did study creative writing, and I
Mm.
actually did a program, like a whole program that was like a creative writing program. And then at the end of it, for our thesis, we basically had to submit like a complete body of work. And so for myself,
Does
uh,
that mean like one story or
oh yes, good question. It could either be a novel or a collection of short stories.
okay,
And so for me, it was a collection of short stories.
nice.
And so and a lot of my teachers in general, just thought my stuff was like really out there and it was like too weird. And this is really before self-publishing really took off.
Ah, yeah.
And it was just like me, basically, it was like a few, like five publishing houses that really
Mm.
controlled the industry. And so they said, you're really going to have like a hard time getting published. But I had one professor that actually really believed in me. And he really liked, what I had to do. And he actually had a friend that owned like a publishing, like an indie publishing company.
Hmm.
And he was like, yeah, my friend Dennis, like he's like, I practically like guarantee that he will publish your work. And
That's cool.
yes, but for some reason I just sat on it. I just
Oh yeah.
kept making like little edits that really were not consequential to anybody except for me.
Yeah.
and and yeah, and then at the same time like applying for jobs that had nothing to do with writing at all, because I think I was still in my mind, I was holding this idea in my head that it wasn't really possible to support yourself doing anything creative.
Hmm.
And so I had to focus on more practical things.
Yeah. I feel you 100%.
And so like years passed, and finally I submitted it to him. But by that time he had already kind of moved on. Like he was more into art, like
Mm.
painting and stuff, and not so much into writing anymore, publishing. And
Yeah.
it's not that nothing's ever truly lost, but it was kind of a good
No.
learning experience.
Yeah. Sometimes you're the only one in your own way, right? It's
Exactly.
yeah. I remember writing that in my journal about a particular transaction where I was trying to figure out a solution and then I wrote it down. I was like, just get out of the way.
Yeah.
Like I was just trying to manage something that didn't need to be managed, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's that Neville quote, right? It's like I don't remember the exact words, but like the only reason that you're not experiencing your desire right now is because you keep insisting that it's not there.
Hmm.
And yeah, I can very
That's
much
so true.
relate to that.
Yeah. That's a weird one. At least it was a very weird one for me at first. The idea, it's hard to like wrap your head around it
Oh,
when you're like,
totally.
oh, yeah. Like if you take it for granted, as he teaches that, um, and as Joseph teaches that you are love, joy, happiness, fulfillment, then you already are all of those things. And those are all of the things that you could possibly desire. So then you're like, well, what's the impetus for action, right? Isn't that for a very rational mind? like I remember Jordan Peterson said that like if you if you tell yourself that you're perfect, and if you tell other people that they're perfect just the way they are,
Hmm.
for him that was very depressing.
Hmm.
'Cause he was like, so then I should just like sit here and like wait to die? Or does it mean I can't, does it mean that all of the things that I find inadequate about my life, I cannot change because this is as good as it gets,
Yeah.
right? So at first, when you're like, oh, I already have all of these things that I desire,
Hmm.
you're like, well, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah,
It
exactly.
really doesn't. But as with, I guess, all mystical traditions, you have to hold that it cannot be explained so easily with
Hmm.
words, right? You have to hold
Exactly.
that incoherence and work with it
Hmm.
and sort of wrestle with it and jimmy yourself into place, you know, sort
Yeah.
of, you know. At some point, it starts making sense. You're like, oh, okay. If I treat every action and opportunity from that emotional and rational position that I already have everything that I want,
Hmm.
then I really do get out of the way and I let these things happen. And I
Exactly.
feel worthy because it's normal that this opportunity comes to me because this is already who I am. It's coherent.
Exactly.
Mm,
Yeah, I definitely struggled with that for a long time, and it's still something that I really kind of go back and forth on. But I think when I got into A Course in Miracles
mm,
and I read Joseph references this book a lot. It's The Heavenly Life by James Allen. When I read that book and when I started getting into A Course in Miracles, I felt that's when I felt everything really starting to come together.
mm,
And so I don't think A Course in Miracles um, ever refers to itself as being like a non-dual text, but I think that's kind of the best way to describe it
mm.
because it's basically the whole goal is to get you beyond the programs of the mind. And
Right.
the whole thing is kind of based around the so it's a channel text and the whoever's writing the text claims that it's coming from the Holy Spirit. And so the Holy Spirit is kind of like the mediator. And it's kind of
And it
like the
speaks to the
mediator.
first person, right?
Exactly. So it's like the mediator
Hmm.
between your mind and between God, essentially. Every day there's these different mantras and it's very kind of intensive. Like it obviously you don't have to do anything, but it encourages you
Hmm.
to say these mantras like every hour throughout the day.
Hmm.
And I understand now why they do that. And to be honest, I've never been done it that rigorously. But
Yeah.
I get why they do it because these programs in our minds, they're so sometimes the grip can be so strong
Yeah.
that sometimes it takes like that, that amount of time to really kind of break through. But what I'm
Mm,
starting to realize is,
mm,
and this is what James Allen talks about in The Heavenly Life, he refers to the divine center. And so the divine center, because it's the center, it's not, you don't have to climb up a bunch of levels to get to it. Like it's just always there and it's always accessible.
mm,
And so I find when I sit in stillness that it's much easier to access that point. And I used to get
mm.
very impatient in the stillness. Like I would think, well, what
Oh
is this
yeah.
doing for me? Like and like
Yeah.
where I would do it for a few seconds and then be ready to move on to something else. But I find
Mm,
that the more I sit in that space, the more it expands. And then the more all those programs start to fade away. And I start to
mm,
realize that all those stories that I've been telling myself are they're just words. They don't really have to have like any power over me. And
mhm,
so, yeah, and even I know in kind of mainstream manifestation teachings, they talk a lot about thoughts and feelings and changing your thoughts and feelings. But when you come to this place, you don't even really have to. change them. You just recognize that just like everything else, they're just kind of passing forms. And
Yeah.
you don't have
You
to.
stop identifying with them.
Exactly. You stop
Hmm.
identifying. Exactly. And I know Joseph
Hmm.
talks a lot about that as well.
Yeah. It, I'm still discovering like progressively what that means, like to
Yes.
identify with something, to to stop identifying with something. Like it's at first, because that's the nature of words, right? Like we use them all the time, so sometimes they'll their meaning will like change a little bit, they'll become diluted, or you hear the word and you're not really thinking about what it means.
Mhm.
It's just like you hear the whole sentence and it's this weird object. But yeah, with identifying, it's like I am. So I
Mhm.
am this, I am that. If you identify with your body, you think I am my body. Like
Exactly.
this is me. Uh, fundamentally, like
Hmm.
in an essential way, like at your essence, you are this body. Well, we would say that's taking the name of the Lord in vain,
Hmm.
because I am not a body. I
Exactly.
am, you know, I am either nobody or everybody or
Yeah.
anybody, but
Exactly.
definitely not a body.
Yes.
And so, yes, to identify with certain emotions is to imagine that you are your anger, that you are
Mhm.
your pain, that you are your, and that means that you can't let go of them because that
Mhm.
is death. I would die, or because I am my body and I am my pain and I am my anger. If I let go of my pain and my anger, I will die,
Mhm.
right? Because
Exactly.
what am I then, right? If you identify with something deeper, closer to your essence, closer to the source, and that's a work that you can do during meditation, or just in thought or life in general, then it's very easy to stop identifying with these things. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean if you don't identify with them and if they go, if they leave you, it doesn't make you any less, right? It doesn't subtract from you. And that's the attitude that allows you to really change and let go.
Absolutely. Yes. And recently I had a memory this was over a decade ago, but when I first started tutoring, I was just kind of looking like online for different lesson plans, and I came across this slideshow on, or this PowerPoint presentation on semiotics. And the very first slide was that famous French painting that were of the pipe. And you probably know the saying in French, but it's in English, it's "this is not a pipe." And
Oh
what would it
yeah,
be
yeah,
in
yeah. Ceci
French?
n'est pas une pipe.
Yes, exactly.
Ceci n'est pas une pipe. Yeah.
Yes. And it was Magritte, right?
That's a it's a painting, right?
Exactly.
Is it? Yeah.
And so that really was like mind blowing to me. And so is this whole idea that just because we use a word to refer to something, that's not like the actual like essence like of the pipe or of the object. And
Right.
um, and similarly, I think this is like an NLP technique where you can, if you're kind of telling a story to yourself or repeating something to yourself that feels really heavy, like if you're saying like I'm a failure and or nothing I do ever
Hmm.
works. And then you kind of swap it out for something nonsensical, like you say, like I'm a water bottle, and then all of a sudden it
Oh
just
yeah.
kind of loses its its
Yeah, you're
edge.
like, oh, wait a minute. It doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's just
Yeah,
kind
that
of
makes a lot of sense actually.
yeah, and it's just kind of realizing that yeah, that none of this stuff really has to have any power over you unless you give it that
Hmm.
power.
That's right.
And yeah, and I used to think too that I don't know, going to that meditative state or whatever, connecting to the center meant that you didn't have emotions. But now I realize that you can still have a ton of emotions, but you just no longer identify with them. And in a way, I
Yeah.
find it's even richer because now, like things that I might have considered like upsetting before are like, oh, I don't want to go here. And now I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's like a really like beautiful experience.
Right. Yeah, even things that are I would have thought before that's objectively negative. Like
Mhm.
there's no matter how woo I get, this sucks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And fair enough, like some things do suck, like
Yeah,
death, for example, sucks
yeah.
pretty bad. But you still get the choice of how you're gonna deal with it, like
Exactly.
what your relationship is with it, that you can definitely decide. And there's this really good story. I think it's somewhere on After School. You know that channel?
No.
Oh, it's pretty good. They do like animations and
Oh, cool.
they take like talks from other I don't know. I watch a lot of them from Alan Watts. They do like
Very cool.
they animate bits from Alan Watts, and they did a bunch of other people, but it's it's made to it's a lot of things to like open your perspective,
Hmm.
right? So it's not like all Alan Watts type stuff. Sometimes it's more sometimes like economics, history, stuff like that. But always with a certain human perspective. And oh yeah, so they had it's cool with a K, by the way. And they had this one episode where they told this story that's a I think it's from China. And it's sort of a allegorical story. I'll probably butcher it, but here it goes. This farmer, um, he has he has a couple of horses. Okay. And one day, one of his horses leaves the pen and flees. And so all of his neighbors come to him and they tell him, "Oh, for you, it's such bad news that your horse left."
Hmm.
And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. We'll see."
Hmm.
And so obviously they're like, "What are you talking about? You don't know. Like you just lost a horse. That's a pretty big loss, you know?" Like you only have three. You lost a third of your wealth.
Yeah.
Like it sucks. He's like, "I don't know. We'll see." The next day, the horse comes back with a a female horse with him,
Mhm.
right? So now he just got two horses instead of the one he lost. So the neighbors come to him and they tell him, "Oh, it's so wonderful. You're so lucky. The horse came back and it brought another horse. Can you believe that? It's so good." He says, I don't know. We'll see." Again, they're like, "What are you talking about? That you just got two horses? You thought you had lost your first one. It's super good. It's just good." The next day, his son tries to break the new horse and falls off the horse and breaks his leg. So all the neighbors come, "Oh, it's so sad. I'm so sorry. It's such a bad thing." No, I don't know. We'll see. A few days later, the emperor declares war on the neighboring kingdom, and the army comes by to grab the conscripts. And they look at his son and they say, "Well, he can't come. Like his leg is broken." But that's the end of the line. You could probably go forever,
Forever,
but yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You know, oh, it's so good that your son doesn't have to go to war. Maybe
Yes.
we'll see. But there's a lot of wisdom in that. Um, like good and bad are very much relative,
Mhm.
and also we're not. I relate it also with um, the ways of the Lord are unknowable, and the idea that you shouldn't focus on the how, but you should
Hmm.
focus on the destination and try to experience the destination feelingly and in thought, um, without making it your business how things happened. I think that wisdom is encapsulated in part in that story where this this farmer is very humble in front of how things work out. He doesn't think, "Oh, I know where this is going to lead."
Yeah.
He thinks, "I don't know where this
Hmm.
is going to lead," right? And then if you add faith to that equation where you do know where it's going to lead, but you might not understand why it's taking this path, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, I asked for my son to always be safe and with me. Let's say this is my desire. And then my horse leaves. My horse comes back with another horse, seems completely unrelated. Then my son tries to mount one of the
Hmm.
horses, breaks his leg. You're
Hmm.
like, well, that's not what I asked for, obviously. Oh, the army comes. Oh, you can stay and you're not going to have to go and die fighting the neighboring kingdom. Oh, fantastic. Right.
Uh-huh.
That's what I was desiring. And I had faith all along that we were going to get there,
Hmm.
but I didn't know how. And, me, if he had had a different attitude, if he was less humble in front of these events, who knows what could have happened? Like, oh, I'm worried about my son's safety, so I'm not going to let him mount the horse. Then he doesn't mount the horse, but then he goes out to work and he dies, right? It's like you never know,
I love that. I've heard that story before, but I really like
right?
how you told it. And I
Thank
like
you.
your perspective too. I've never really thought about it in that distinct way, like in terms
Mm.
of the how. And so yeah, that's really interesting.
I
And
love
the
those
way
stories where you can always dig and find new,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But yeah, the way that I saw it is that in life there's always going to be these ebbs and flows or perceived ebbs
Hmm.
and flows. And if you're allowing those to dictate your emotions. And so, I'm an entrepreneur, and I imagine real estate is kind of the same way, right? There's kind of fluctuations in income, and
Yeah,
so if you allow your emotions to be dictated by those fluctuations, like you're really happy and relieved when the money's coming in, and then you're really worried
yeah.
and frantic when it's not coming in,
You're in
and
for a terrible time.
yes,
I tried it.
exactly.
It wasn't nice.
So yeah, in reality transurfing, they call that the pendulum, right? You'll always be on the
Right.
pendulum.
Mm.
And yeah, actually, yeah, I find a lot of kind of good tools in reality transurfing. And so I kind of see that as be kind of coming back to the center screen, or,
Yeah,
what James Allen refers to as the divine center.
yeah.
And they have a really good line. I refer to this a lot in reality transurfing. I see myself, I see my reality. And so whenever you find yourself just getting like immersed in what's happening around you, or even in your own, the movie playing in your head, this kind of
Mm.
allows you to kind of freeze the frame and gain some perspective.
Hmm.
And then you can kind of see the bigger picture. And
Right.
this also kind of, the story also kind of reminds me of this whole idea that appearances are not what they seem.
Hmm.
And anytime I find myself getting panicked about something, I tell myself that.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, I might get like a message from my boss, and maybe the message, I attach like a certain worried thought to the message. And I'm like, oh, appearances are not what they seem. I remind myself that. And then the
Hmm.
message actually turns out to be a good thing. And even if it was something, one time it was something where I thought it was something that was not good. And then my boss was like, oh, that was just a misunderstanding.
Right.
and, um, and I heard a really good take on this, that it's not only, in the Bible, they say, don't judge by appearances. It's not just that
Mhm.
you should not judge, but you actually can't judge by appearances because we can't see the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's
And
unreliable as a method.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So now I just tell myself that I know that there is a bigger picture, even if
Hmm.
I can't really see it. And just
Right.
trusting that it's all unfolding perfectly.
Hmm.
Or as Abraham Hicks says, everything is always working out for me.
Yeah,
And I think that's really just a good attitude to have in general.
it really is. And it gives you, if any, like, if nothing else, it gives you the best chances to make the best out of a bad or mediocre situation, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Mm. I know for me, because as you said, like income is very much irregular in
Hmm.
that kind of business. And also you're not like I'm not paid by hour, obviously. So I'm paid when the transaction goes through,
Hmm.
which means that for some clients, the work that makes me deserving of my commission can be literally one phone call. I send them five properties. They're like, "Oh, great, let's visit these three this weekend." We go, we do an hour and a half of visits. I like the first one. Let's make an offer. We make an offer. They accept it. And inside of a week, it's done. It's super simple.
Hmm.
We we go into conditions for inspection, financing, all that stuff. Everything goes through super smoothly. You go to the notary and sign the bill of sales and all that stuff. And, you know, that's super simple. I barely
Hmm.
worked, and I got the
Yeah.
commission. Other times, most times, it's not that simple. You'll probably go back and forth with the client for a bunch of like just to understand if you guys are going to work together, and then you're going to be doing like you're going to be exchanging about properties and different properties for like a month and a half before you even start the visits. And then you
Hmm.
start the visits, and then it's going to be like 5 days of visits. And then they pick one to make an offer on. And then you make the offer, and then it's refused. And then you have to do 10 rounds of offers for different properties and blah, blah, blah. So it's very easy to get discouraged during that
Yes.
process,
Hmm.
right? Because there's really no difference between two transactions, between the work I did, right? I did the same thing, but I'm getting a different result,
Hmm.
right? And that can be super frustrating. Like
Totally.
I showed them the property, I told them everything on the property, I showed them the documents, I educated them about the state of the property. Um, we made the offer, I negotiated, I tried to set it up perfectly. I tried to keep
Hmm.
everybody's thoughts, priorities, and feelings into account. And one times it works, and the other times it's a no. And yeah, you did the same work, but then it really helped me not only make the best out of a bad situation, um, but also keep my clients happy and
Hmm.
interested and keep the flow of things moving to adopt the attitude of mind of I don't know why we didn't get that house,
Hmm.
but it's great. That must
Hmm.
mean that there's a better one waiting for us.
Yes,
That must mean that the
exactly.
house that my clients were meant to live in, we
Hmm.
haven't found yet, right?
Hmm.
So adopt a grateful attitude of mind. Thank
Hmm.
you for not letting me have this property because now I get to move on and go and find the true property that they were really looking for, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
pretty close to insanity, The line is thin, right?
no, but I can totally relate to that. And sometimes it can be very frustrating. Like it feels like we're doing all the right things and we're still not getting the results that we want.
Yeah.
And this can apply to many things. It can apply to, yeah, you try different, manifestation techniques, or it could apply to your business as well.
Hmm.
And I know for copywriting, the way that I've always gotten clients in the past was through email outreach.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very much a numbers game. I had a spreadsheet and I had a list, and I would just go through as many people on the list as I could each day. I would mark down on the spreadsheet if they responded or not. Most people don't.
Hmm.
And so and I got to the point where I got like a few retainer clients. And so it was pretty much getting like a reliable salary each month.
Yeah, that's really
And
cool.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. But then I lost one of those clients, which meant my
Oh yeah.
income went down to half. And
Hmm.
so I was like, oh, I need to go out and find more clients again. And I wasn't worried because this process had never failed me in the past.
Right.
And so I did the exact same thing consistently for months with, and every now and then I would get somebody saying they were interested, and a
Hmm.
couple of times there were even interviews, but then it just wouldn't pan out.
Right.
And yeah, so I started getting very discouraged.
Hmm.
And um, and then eventually the client that I had been working with all this time, my other client, they suddenly gave me like a new position, like that would be a retainer position. Um,
Oh, nice.
yes, exactly.
So
Which
that was
which
an
meant
existing client that wasn't on
exactly,
retainer. Oh, okay.
exactly. And so yeah, and so then all of a sudden I was good again. I was getting good work, and then um, like a year or so later, or a year after I really started well, basically in December of 2023, I believe, around that time, when I was doing a lot of outreach, there was a particular client or prospect that I had reached out to. And pretty much exactly a year later, so November 2024, this client actually reached out to me. And they were like, oh, well, I'm sorry it took us a year to respond, but we
That's
actually
funny.
need somebody to do our copywriting for us.
Right.
And it was right around the time that they were kind of switching my position again with my other company. So it was
Okay.
perfect timing. And and I was like, well, I don't, I have no clue, what they're going to pay or what this is going to be like. It was actually so I write for universities, and so this was a
Hmm.
university that I had gone to. So I guess I had some sway with them, and it was
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
an art school, which is so it would be really interesting assignments. So I was
Hmm.
thinking, regardless of what they pay, I'm just going to take this because it'll be a really cool opportunity. And then when she told me how much they pay, I'm glad it was like over the phone, not on video, because I
Oh
was like
yeah.
shocked. Like it was like more than twice as much as my other client was paying,
Oh my God.
which I thought was a lot. So
Yeah, that's fantastic.
because in the early days of writing, it was hard for me um, to get like even $100 per article. And
Hmm.
so I was so shocked. And so I think all this just goes to show you never know.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's something more going on than
Hmm.
um, the tools and the processes and all of that. But all you can do is just kind of trust that whatever you're doing at the moment is leading you somewhere, even if you don't
Yeah.
know where it's leading you.
Exactly. Exactly. And the idea is that if you if you assume the place where you're going to end up, you'll probably end up there,
Exactly.
right? Because everything you do, whether you're conscious of it or not, and the way you position yourself in the world are going to be coherent with that assumption.
Exactly. Yes.
So once again, if that's an entry point, it was an entry point for me. If nothing else, just this very rational explanation can explain why it's important to have hygiene around your thoughts and your emotions. And essentially, that's the
Exactly.
basis of manifestation, right?
Totally. Yes. And yeah, it's funny. It seems so obvious, but I actually have to remind myself of this. That at the end of the day, like I'm really doing it for me
Yes.
because
Yeah.
because there was a time when during this time when I was sending out all these outreach emails and not getting any response and not really making much money at all. And every single day I would, at first, at first I it didn't really like affect me emotionally. I just kind of felt pretty neutral about it.
Hmm.
But as the months passed more on, I started to get very frustrated and discouraged.
Yeah.
And yeah, getting to the point where I would just was just constantly just yeah, just very frustrated and would get
Hmm.
angry every time I opened my email and would see there were no new responses.
Yeah.
And at a certain point I was like, I'm tired of feeling this way. And if nothing else, even if I don't get a new client today, I'd rather just feel better. And like
Yeah, right.
I'm tired of
Because I'm
feeling
gonna
like
get
crap.
the client or not get the client anyways, so
Exactly.
might as well feel good doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's the AAs have this prayer, right? Where it's like please give me um the strength to change what I can change and the courage to accept what I can't.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes,
That
100%.
is so true too, because it's like,
Hmm.
well, as you said, it's a numbers game for a lot of these things. So it's like if you're doing the consistent action, that's that's what you can do. And then the result coming in, it's that you have no control over it, right?
Hmm.
Or very little. So you go on about your life, you feel satisfied if you know that you've done what you have to do and what is coherent with where you're going to, and you just trust, right? Things work out
Absolutely.
eventually.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
hard though.
it is. But yeah, trust has been like a big one for me. Yeah,
Mhm.
just learning to trust and learning to surrender. And
Yeah.
I think it was just I got to a point where nothing else was really I had exhausted all other possibilities.
Hmm.
Like it's not like I was new to hearing about the surrender thing, but
No,
like
it at some point you take it more seriously, maybe,
yeah.
like, oh, okay, I'm really paying attention to it now, and or that's something I had recently. I had a little bit of a phase where I was like, my, let's say my spiritual life and the rest of my life were like very much separated.
Hmm.
And I had certain beliefs that I held and I felt pretty convinced about in my spiritual life. But then the way I took my decisions and behaved in the rest of my life was incoherent with these.
Hmm.
And I didn't notice at first, right? Because it's just like sort of things that you do. And but recently I was like, wait a minute, I'm making these decisions as if thoughts weren't things, right? Or as if I can't go to my father, close the door of the closet, and received his blessings, right?
Hmm.
So at some point you're like, okay, wait, if I gotta choose, right? It's
Hmm.
either I believe this for real and I really go all in on it, or I decide that I don't want to check it out and I want to continue using force to realize my objectives, right?
Totally.
And yeah, and for me,
Yeah,
it just wasn't an option to use force anymore. It just feels shitty all the time.
it
And then you're
does.
like, what's the
It
point?
does.
What am I doing here? Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
mm,
And
definitely.
yeah, and that's what I see as that's kind of how I interpret buying the pearl of great price now. I didn't really get it before, but now I that's how I see it as really just giving up, just relying on all these secondary sources and yeah, just trying
Mm,
to force things, trying to micromanage things, and really just kind of recognizing your oneness, with all that is and allowing that to guide you and just trusting that everything that you're doing right now, like I said, that it is leading you somewhere,
hmm.
even if you can't recognize it.
Yeah, you usually can't.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. The proof of like to really disregard the proof of the senses is super hard. Who was it? Was it? Daniel or something. I don't remember who's like in the Bible. There's this guy that like he's thrown in a pit with lions, hungry lions, and he like looks away. I think that's a super good story. It's a very interesting story because the the lions are the physical material primal world,
Hmm.
right? And there's this immediate proof that he's in great danger, right?
Hmm.
And that consequences are imminent for for being flesh in the presence of lions, essentially.
Yes.
And he keeps his attention off of these dangers and off of this proof, and he keeps his gaze fixed on the highest good, right? And on the word of God, which is could be said to be his desire, right? His true, pure, innermost desires. Um, I think it's a very poignant image for me.
Absolutely. Yes. And is there any like specific way that you've applied it? Because
Mm.
yeah, I love that story also.
Um, it comes back to the start of our conversation a little bit. It's habit, right?
Hmm.
You were saying like the in a course in miracles, they were talking about mantras sort of, or like repeating things multiple times during the day. I find that the our normal way of thinking, let's say, or habitual way of thinking, it's like ruts in the on the highway, right? Like
Hmm.
if you can get out of the ruts, but if you stop paying attention, like you'll get back in the ruts, right?
Hmm.
The car will just well. So for me, from my experience, it's been very similar, and it's essentially the more I just spend time out of the ruts, and when I find myself in the ruts, I just no shame, no condemnation, get out of the ruts again. Like when you realize, oh, I'm in the ruts again, right? No
Exactly.
problem. As in meditation, redirect your attention to truth, and and eventually new ruts form. It's a habit, right? So you're in the habit of thinking it in the old way.
Hmm.
So you just have to be persistent and know that every time, every second that you spend thinking in the new way is a second closer to you becoming the new you, right?
Totally.
Mm.
Yes. Um, I'm sorry, my computer is making weird noises. Can you hear it?
Is it? No, I can't.
Okay, good. It's a little temperamental. It's definitely getting towards its end days, end
Oh
times.
yeah.
um, but yeah, I love that. And to me, I kind of see it as coming back to center court in tennis. And so you can
Okay.
see the either side of the court, that's kind of like the pendulum, right? And
Mm,
but if you keep coming back to the center each time, then yeah, you'll always be there when the ball comes to you. So
right.
yeah, so
So
it's
you'll
like
be
you
in an
keep
optimal position, whatever happens.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's like you keep coming back to the center.
Mm,
And I find that more and more, the more I keep coming back to the center, now it's like it's not even really like something I have to consciously do as much anymore.
right.
It's like things kind of naturally bring me back there, or they kind of
More and more,
reinforce
it's your default
exactly.
setting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And even when I think
That's
I'm
what's cool.
on a detour, like it's still there's still like a connection point.
Mm. Well, yeah, especially if you have that mentality of I am on a detour, but I trust that I know where I'll end up anyways. So, like, if I'm here, this must be the way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
It's a cool attitude towards it. It's been, I might change subject a little bit, but not that much. Um, because we've referenced many different books or
Hmm.
texts during the conversation, which I love. And for me, it's been super helpful to read different styles of book that at the end of the day are on the same subject. And it's not necessarily apparent at first that they're on the same subject.
Hmm.
Um, like Neville Goddard's work, and then A Course in Miracles. Okay, maybe those are a little bit closer because they have a very Christian undertone.
Hmm.
But then you look at things like Dr. Joe Dispenza's Becoming Supernatural and or reality trend surfing, and there's something they talk a lot more in the language of quantum physics, and they try to be more scientific about it a
Hmm.
little bit, right? I think well, for Joe Dispenza, definitely, he's willingly making sure that it's closer to the scientific attitude than to the more woo-woo, you know, culture in a way.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Because I know that for a while, he was very much associated with, like, people were like, well, he's fucking crazy. Like, he's just saying silly things. And he's pretending it's scientific, but it's bullshit.
Hmm.
And so he had to really, like, consciously make a big effort and do some tests with some scientists, invite some scientists and do some stuff, which I love. This is great
Hmm.
because it bridges the gap between different understandings of things, right?
Hmm.
And And then there's the Bible, obviously, which is pretty good manual,
For sure.
um, but very mystical. So when you first read it, like, especially because we're so used to reading stories in um, at the first degree,
Hmm.
that it's totally lost on you.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's like you're
Uh-huh.
reading a history book, but
Yeah.
that's has very limited use.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the more I read the same ideas in a way, but coming from different angles, the easier it is for me to understand like the real essence of the message, right?
Totally.
Mm.
Yeah, I like
Because when
doing the.
you
Oh,
no,
sorry.
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
for it. Well, I was just gonna mention the whole thing about uh what does he call it in reality trend surfing? It's like the not the field of possibilities or something like that.
It's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then Dispenza will say like the quantum field or the
Hmm.
unified field or something like that. Some other people will, like Neville would probably say that's um wow, like the third letter of Yahweh,
Hmm.
right? Like the
Exactly.
fertile plain, but it could also be it's also the father because it's also where maybe I'm not sure about that actually. I believe it's probably also where your desires come from,
Hmm.
right? And it is somewhere where all is one
Hmm.
and it's
Exactly.
very, very unified. So there's something very godlike about that,
Hmm.
right? So I don't know, all of these different books with these different angles, and they really help me flesh out what this all means, right?
Yeah, I like doing the same thing. Yeah, I like making kind of the parallels or the connections. And because when you do that, you kind of find that even seeming paradoxes, they could be reconciled.
Hmm.
And yeah, even though, yeah, reality transurfing and Neville, they use very different language, I can also see like a lot of parallels between them.
All
And
right.
also, Maxwell Maltz in Psycho-Cybernetics, he talks about like the servo mechanism.
Yeah.
And it's the whole idea, right? You keep your eye on the prize, and then everything just kind of, you don't worry about the how. That's not the language that
Yeah.
he uses, but that's what's kind of implied.
Yeah.
And then everything just kind of, you know, falls into place. And
Mhm.
even a supposed failure, it actually kind of acts as like a corrective device, and it actually kind of ends up bringing you closer to your goal. And so it sounds very much like what Neville would describe as the bridge of incidents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Isn't that fascinating?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's cool. The more I find similar comprehensions and knowledges in different domains, the more I find it um, compelling, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things I'm the most excited about, I would say, for our time is the idea that our scientific understanding of the world is sort of catching up to a lot of the mystical understanding of the world that we've had for millennia, right?
Hmm. For sure.
Things that we rejected during um, les Lumières, the lights. Is that how you call it in English? Like the period of time in Europe where they kind of rejected a little bit more religion and went back, went for rationality a lot more.
Like the Dark
Like
Ages.
Descartes and no, after that. Um,
Well, there was the
with
Dark
Descartes,
Ages and then the Renaissance.
right. I think the lights I'm referring to, it's probably during Renaissance, probably at the end of it,
Okay.
before the just before the it was kind of the transition to the industrial age, I think,
Hmm.
or something like that, right? Um, and they started reading the Greek texts a lot of like philosophy and all. There was a big Greek knowledge revival,
Hmm.
um, and at first they were still very much attached to the church and its way of thinking, very dogmatic way of thinking. But then it kind of I that's probably where the schism started between the scientific world and the church, right? In Europe,
Hmm.
at least. Um, don't even remember where I was going with that.
So basically, you were talking about how the scientific community is starting
Oh,
to
catching up.
recognize, yeah, catching up.
Right.
Exactly.
There's like this bridge. Well, catching up, maybe I'm saying that to excite the passions of the
Yeah.
scientific world,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
But but yeah, for sure, it is fascinating because you see, I read when I was younger a lot of like Buddhist or
Hmm.
Taoist texts, right? Just out of curiosity. And yeah, the things they talk about, the way they describe things and the dynamics, the causal effects that they describe for the scientific world, it's like, well, that's completely ridiculous, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Especially if you read the mystical stories in the first degree, then it's not wrong that it doesn't make any sense. Like at the first
Yeah.
degree, it
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean there's no meaning, like or very
Hmm.
little meaning. Um, but yeah, to see these gaps being bridged between, we can understand more and more like how our thoughts and our emotions affect us. Like when you read Joe Dispenza and he talks about the way he talks about frequencies a lot. And, Nikola Tesla said, if you want to understand the secrets of this world, you need to think in terms of frequencies and vibration.
Hmm. Exactly.
And that's exactly how he goes about it. He talks how your literal organs will generate a literal electromagnetic field,
Hmm.
and this electromagnetic field has a signature, which is expressed in terms of frequency and vibration, right? So obviously that has a massive relationship with the idea of an aura,
Hmm.
right?
For
And
sure.
he talks about all of these centers that are, we call them plexus in the scientific language. The Indian mystics would probably call it chakras,
Hmm.
right? And so chakras, it's fucking bullshit, blah blah. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, how interesting though that every point that is associated with a chakra has its own plexus of glands that are have a secretion that's hormonal, and hormones are the number one driver of behavior in human chemistry, right?
Hmm.
So if that doesn't make you curious about the relationship between power and like real physical reality, and I don't know, like to me it's super interesting.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just started reading a book called The Mathematical Universe. I'm only like a chapter into it, but yeah, it's talking about all these concepts and the whole idea of like parallel realities. And yeah, I think it's interesting. Yeah, just to look at it
Mhm.
from all the angles.
Yeah, all the angles. And you can get so deep, like I've failed to find the end of it for sure. Uh
Hmm.
like just the idea that sounds very esoteric to say like um we are all light. Like there is
Hmm.
only light, right?
Exactly.
Or physical reality is an illusion. It's all light, right?
Hmm.
It's all vibrations and it's all frequencies. Sounds like, well, okay, that sounds nice, but like I'm sitting in a chair and I'm not going through the
Yeah.
chair, and like there's a table, and so if intuitively it feels silly, right?
Hmm.
But then you're like, oh, when you get into like deep into physics and you realize, well, the reason why two pieces of matter don't go through each other is not because they're full, because really they're like 99.9999% empty, right? Like if you look at an atom, like I think they were saying, what was it, the relationship between the nucleus of an atom, um, and its total size if you encompass all of the um, like the electron cloud, right? It's
Hmm.
like the nucleus is like a Volkswagen Beetle, and then the
Yes.
cloud is like I don't know, like Florida or something, right?
Hmm.
So it's nuts, and the electrons aren't even there.
Hmm.
They're they have possible places where they can be, but they're nowhere until they're observed, and then they're somewhere. They're actually localized.
Hmm.
So they're a wave when they're not observed, and then they're a particle when they are observed. And how the fuck do you explain that if you don't
Exactly.
like just purely physically like
Yeah, exactly.
attention? Like what is the physical quality of attention,
Hmm.
right? You put attention on something. If a conscious being becomes aware of this thing,
Hmm.
then it will crystallize into an actual physical spot. But otherwise, just everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You know, like,
Exactly.
what does that teach us about what we are
Hmm.
and how things work, like causality? Because obviously, our awareness just caused something to take physical form. Hmm,
Totally.
how strange.
And I think about it like this, and this kind of goes to the idea of symbiotics again, and nothing really having an inherent reality outside of the meaning that we give it.
Mhm.
And so, for instance, if you take color blindness, right? So that's proof that there's not just like one objective reality that everybody experiences exactly the same. Or let's
Right.
say there's somebody that people might refer to as being schizophrenic. And people might say, oh, well, they're hearing or perceiving things that are not there. But to that
Mhm.
individual, whatever they're perceiving, it's a very real experience.
Yeah. And then it takes you to some very deep questions of what is real and what is not. Like, what does that
Exactly.
even mean? Like, oh, it's real.
Hmm.
Okay. I mean, it's a super interesting question.
Totally.
And with color is an interesting thing too. For me, when I understood very early, like in science class, that like technically objects don't exactly have a color.
Hmm.
Like it's the way they reflect light is interpreted by our brains, but really the color is sort of just in our brains, right? It's like assigned from the brain. So that means, like, what is the true color of an object? It's pretty much a senseless question in a way. And like, I'm not sure if we can even be sure that all of the people that are not colorblind see the same colors. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, what's it to say that what I perceive as blue, like the qualities I imagine for blue, like you see the same ones?
Mhm.
I believe we probably do, probably, or about, right?
Mhm.
But like this is an interesting door into what perception is, right?
Exactly.
Oh, things are not exactly how they seem. And yeah, so definitely it's like it's a quality that feels very obvious intuitively, but really it's just a value that's assigned by our biology to a vibration, right?
Totally. And what you were saying about the
Strange thing.
colors too, that actually reminded me of when I was a kid, we watched Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Hmm.
And he was saying, he was pointing to the grass and saying the grass is not really green. And it was the same thing. He was talking about light, basically, and the way the light interacted with the grass.
Yeah, yeah. As a kid, you're like, this Bill Nye guy seems green.
Yeah, exactly.
Nah, the grass is green. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. What was I think? Oh yeah, perception. Because I had another phase of like really reflecting upon what is perception, what does it mean? Yeah, what's the real nature of perception? When I entered university, I started university in psychology originally.
Mhm.
Super interesting field, obviously.
For sure.
Right. I left it I mostly because I realized that I didn't want to, because it's very long studies, right? You have to do your PhD.
Hmm.
And then you have essentially two options, which is either you do research and you teach,
Hmm.
or you have a practice, right? And I didn't want to do the practice because here we go back to like thoughts and emotional hygiene. I didn't want that life of being always immersed in other people's problems,
Hmm.
right? And maybe that was a little bit naive of me in the sense that maybe that's not exactly what it is like to have a psych practice or whatever. But nevertheless, and I didn't want to do teaching, and my mother's a teacher, so I guess I had the classical syndrome of the child that doesn't want to do what
Me too. My
his
both my
parent
parents
does.
were teachers,
Oh
and
yeah.
I was like, I'm never being a teacher, and then I
Yep,
did end up
that's
teaching, so which is funny.
classic. I've managed to avoid it so far. This and my father's a computer programmer, and I'm really bad at computer programming, so doing good. But yeah, what were they teaching us? Oh yeah, when they when they talk about memory and yeah, just like memories in general, that was very revealing for me because you realize that the point of memories isn't to keep an actual photographic record, right?
Hmm.
It's all around meaning. So it's all relative to the meaning that you assign to it.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we'll have a memory that at first is fairly photographic because we've just had the experience, but it will become tainted. Like if I wanted to make a metaphor, I'd say it's like someone took the footage, put it in Adobe After Effects, and started like tweaking the light a little bit at first and little things. And then they were like, wait a minute, I don't want this person to be in the frame at all, so I'll just remove that person. And then they're like, oh, I need this person to have horns and a little red tail, so like I'll add that onto that person. And that's the memories that we actually have. It's like it started off as a very photographic thing, and then again, that's not even true. Like it started off as a very
Mhm.
tainted thing from your perspective and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then it evolves even deeper until it has a meaning that is coherent
Mhm.
with your beliefs about the world. So your beliefs about the world literally determine your memories and your lived experiences. Again,
That's
right?
so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems like they could kind of go either way, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, like your memories could kind of influence your beliefs around the about the world, especially I would say
Yep.
like childhood memories. And because I think especially as children, we tend to distort things
Hmm.
or don't always remember things super accurately.
Yep.
So then that can kind of influence how we see the world.
Hmm.
Like I have this memory of kindergarten where I my best friend, she wanted me to come over to her house after school and I couldn't for some reason, and then she started crying, and again, this is all the distortion of my memory. I remember her saying something about it was because I didn't like her cat.
Okay.
And- which is funny because I love cats.
Yeah.
And then I remember the teacher like coming over to see what was going on, and again, I'm sure the teacher did not say this because she's a very like sweet, caring person. But in my memory, like I remember her saying something to the telling me something to the effect of "You always upset people," and and so I did it. It was like years before I kind of put two and two together. But I
Yeah,
realized
yeah,
that I did have this fear of like upsetting people or offending people, and so I
yeah,
would kind of overcompensate, and then I would get into these super kind
yeah.
of people pleasing tendencies.
That is so interesting. You're always upsetting people.
I know,
Yeah. It's so funny. That's
I
exactly how it is. It's like you have a
know.
memory, and
Exactly.
they did a lot of tests with this has very grave implications for the legal system. We still don't know how to deal with it really, but creating a memory
Mhm,
essentially, right? Like telling someone, "Oh, remember when that happened?" and blah 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 blah. And they did it like in a scientific way where um they made sure that the experience had never happened to the person, and then
mhm,
they made something up from scratch
mhm.
uh, by someone that doesn't know that person, right? And
Yeah.
then that person, like person B that crafted the story, would come to person A and be like, "Oh, like you remember when you were little, you did this and that, and then that happened, and blah blah. Oh yeah." You can ask Uncle X, like he'll tell you, "Oh, really? Oh, wow, okay." Blah, blah." And then this person starts like really, "Oh yeah, I remember. Oh yeah, and then he did that, right?" And you really believe you have that memory, but it's completely concocted. It
Uh-huh,
never
for
happened,
sure.
right? So like for the question of eyewitnesses, like it makes it pretty rough, right? Because it
Oh,
used to be
totally.
like if you have two eyewitnesses, like that's the golden standard
Mhm,
of for sure, like this happened. But now we see for really not so sure. This might
mhm,
have maybe happened,
mhm.
potentially. Or these people have been sitting in a room where everybody can like repeats the same story, and now they're convinced it happened. That's possible too.
Oh,
That's what
totally.
happens in a tribunal, right? Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah. That was
If
a
you hear
weird
something,
that messed with me for a while.
yeah,
Yeah. Like
how
what
how
like what do I remember? What
mhm,
is and I've always been bad at remembering events too,
mhm.
which is maybe a blessing now because then I don't have to second guess
It
all of
is.
it. Yeah. I remember the conclusions that I draw from the events, like essentially if X then Y. Like I tried to like behave in this particular way, and that really didn't pan out in XYZ. So okay, maybe I'll behave differently next time, right? But so I remember that conclusion of like, oh, I didn't get what I want by doing this, or I did get what I wanted by doing this, and I integrate it, but I can't remember if you tell me a few years later, like what were you doing in, I don't know, 2017, um, around that particular topic? I don't remember, but I remember the conclusions I drew from my experiences, right?
Totally.
And I thought that
And
was really weird for that at first, or incompetent, or I don't know. Like,
no, I see what you're saying because really I think that's probably, I guess, evolutionarily hard word to
yeah,
say.
yeah.
That's probably one of the purposes of memory, right? Is to kind of learn, it's a survival instinct to kind of
Hmm.
learn from our mistakes, and so then we don't
Yeah.
repeat them in the future. Like, oh, I touched that hot fire and that didn't feel so good, so
Yeah.
I
Very
won't
good
do that
example.
again moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think I know this is definitely true for myself. I think where it can kind of hold us back is when we kind of just start making all these kind of like if then
Mm,
links between things, like, oh, the last time I took a course and I didn't get any results from it, and so then
yeah.
like, so it's kind of like projecting these past results into the future.
Hmm.
And I have a feeling that's kind of why Neville, a lot of his exercises kind of have to, or his teachings have to do with memory, like the I remember when technique, because I think we tend to invest a lot in our memories,
Yeah.
and we put a lot of stock into them, and we put a lot of stock into the supposed past. And so this is kind of getting us to look at our past like in a different way
Hmm.
and start kind of using it for our benefit instead of using it to hold us back.
Is that, are you referring to um when he talks about like pruning and revision?
I believe so.
Right, yeah.
And so it would be somebody, like, let's say it was somebody struggling with money. And so they would say, I remember when I was struggling with money, and
Mm,
now the money is flowing to me.
that's
And
so
so
int
it's like
I
taking something that's like a perceived current experience, and usually when it's like something that's current and something that somebody repeats a lot, they're kind of expecting it to always be this way. They're
hmm
already kind of projecting it into their future, and so it's like they're kind of writing themselves a life sentence. And
Yeah.
so this is kind of getting you to put it behind you and be like, okay, well, I remember when that was my story, but now this is my new story.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I I did read like the whole all all of all 10 of Neville's book. Um I had a hard time putting those words in the right order there in my mind for a second. Uh, but yeah, it didn't register in that way. And I guess now that I haven't completed it actually. I'm reading Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza right
Mhm.
now. And the whole notion of like your future is your past if you identify with your past, right?
Exactly.
Um, because if you identify now with your past, then you are your past now. And as you move into the future, well, the future becomes now and now becomes so
Mhm.
if you bring that past that you are now into the future by being now your past, then your future is your past. There's no other
Yeah,
way that you're leaving for your
exactly.
future to go, right? And then when you think about revision,
Mhm.
the idea, because I had a pretty hard time with revision because I was like, it's really weird. It feels like lying to myself. Like
Same.
I my bike was stolen, and I
Mhm.
was like, no, my bike wasn't stolen.
Mhm.
Or and just like, well. No, no, my bike wasn't stolen. Today I had a wonderful day and I brought my bike home nice and safe and it's in the garage. My bike is not in the garage. Okay. But if you look at it that way, where it's like you're as you're as you're experiencing your days, you take
Mhm.
some time at the end of the day to modify the memory to make it coherent with your highest ideal and with your desires. As you do this more and more day after day, eventually your past, like your psychological past, has been revised into being something that looks like the future you desire. So it makes it automatic for you to, if you are your past, but you
Mhm.
revise your past, then it's easy to become the new you in the future.
Oh, wow.
Mm,
That's really cool. And it does make a
right?
lot of sense when you think about it.
Makes perfect
And
sense.
yes.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like the way I look at it, it's like I, you're kind of carrying your baggage into each moment.
Mm,
And really just kind of A Course in Miracles has really helped me a lot with this and just kind of resting in awareness and just
yeah.
seeing each moment as a clean slate. And so, if nothing else, like just stop because I relate to what you were saying. Like I have a hard time convincing
Hmm.
myself doesn't that something didn't happen. But if I
Yeah,
can at
yeah.
least kind of rest in awareness, and if I find myself kind of repeating a story a lot and kind of asking myself, okay, am I aware of the story? And usually I'll just kind of, and am I aware of being aware? And
Yeah,
usually it'll
right.
kind of in that stillness, it'll just start to fade away.
Hmm.
And then it's kind of like a clean slate. And then you can kind
Yeah.
of imagine whatever you want kind of moving forward. So I'll do that sometimes. It just really kind of depends on the situation. And other times I might kind of take something that seemed like it was an unfortunate event, but it actually worked out in my favor. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's kind of another form of revision.
Hmm.
And then I also sometimes, there's something I learned about called the 180 shift, where you take something, and this is usually kind of a statement like, I never, usually they're kind of like negative statements with the word never or always in them. And
Oh,
these
yeah.
are statements that are really easy to refute. And so, I never receive unexpected money. And then you can
Oh,
kind of you challenge yourself to think of all the times where that has happened.
right.
And
Oh, that's cool.
and I was doing that exercise because I that was a belief that I had had. And I actually remembered a time that I actually found, or it was my dad that found it actually, but he gave it to me like just some
Nice.
dollar bills that were just blowing in the wind in the
Yeah.
parking lot of Barnes and Noble. And it was like a lot too. It was like $80. And
Oh, nice.
I
Yeah, yeah.
remembered that. And I was like, okay, well maybe this belief isn't so true after all.
Hmm.
And then I did receive some unexpected money after that. And I don't remember, there were two cases. I don't remember one of them, but one of them was I had to renew my hosting, website hosting.
Yeah, yeah.
And and it was going to be something like $300, and because it was for a year. And I was like, well, I was like, can I just can you give me a discount or something? And she was like, oh, there is something going on right now.
Really?
And
That's
and
insane, right?
and where I could get it like half price. And I
Right.
was like, well, surely that isn't the case. Or I was like, is there some sort of like catch to this? Like, am I,
Yeah, yeah.
is there's, And she was like, no, I was talking to her on chat. She was like, oh, just call it a loophole. And she gave like a winking emoji.
That's hilarious. That's a classic case of ask and you shall receive, right?
Exactly.
Like you just you can't you can't receive something you're not asking for. and you won't ask for something that you believe is absolutely impossible to get, right?
Exactly.
So already there,
Hmm.
because you assume that it was possible for you to get a massive discount, you
Exactly.
ask for it, and then she's like, well, as a matter of fact, because you were gonna not say anything and give me all your money, I was gonna take all your money, but now that you're asking for me to take less of your money, I
Yeah,
will gladly do
exactly.
so. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like it's fantastic.
And it's funny because usually I don't ask, usually unless they have
Yeah,
like something in writing, like I just kind of assume it just is what it is.
yeah, exactly. And you don't want to like look cheap or like something like
Exactly.
that. You know, like, oh, I don't want to be the
Exactly.
person that asks for a discount. This is way below me.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, just ask.
Yes.
Oh, I remember something I wanted to talk about earlier. About not identifying with your emotions. I realized where we were talking that one of the earliest instances, I keep thinking these times, I'm trying to retrace where this path began for me, where I was interested in more esoteric ideas, let's say,
Mhm.
like more hidden knowledge, stuff that's less obvious, evident, physical, rational. Um, and I remember there's a lot of depression, yeah, like clinical depression in my family, and I'm actually born the same date as one of my uncle
Mhm.
who uh, was passed now. And for a long time, I felt like I was sort of destined to go there too, right? To
Mhm.
like he took his own life, essentially. He was very depressed all the time, and he took his own
Mhm.
life. And in part, also because of all the beliefs around the, um, what would you say? The deterministic nature of genes,
Mhm.
right? So I was like, well, like I got the same genes, and like so
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna feel depressed all the time, and
Mhm.
like it's probably normal, and it's probably so it was like like a life sentence for
Mhm.
feeling like shit, right? And I remember it might even have been in after school in the same channel I was talking about earlier, uh, but I'm not sure. Someone was talking about depression, and he was saying like essentially you are not the depression, right?
Mhm.
Like you are not a depressive person. Like you are a person experiencing the feeling of depression in that moment. But that
Absolutely.
feeling is detached from you, and you can step back and observe it, and it will
Mhm.
pass in front of you like a dark cloud, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that was one of the early steps for me to, because what are you learning there? You're learning to detach from the proof of the senses,
Mhm.
and you're learning to go deeper into your nature, into your essence, into what or who you are, which is not that emotion, right?
Mhm.
So the path to finding what I am starts with determining what I am not, right?
Exactly.
And I am not depressed, right?
Mhm.
Like I am feeling XYZ right now.
Mhm.
That's fine. But I am not that. And you're yeah, you're learning to identify basically with something that is different than your senses. So a lot of wisdom in a small,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
So you feel like that has really shifted things for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Because it became easier and easier every day for me to when I was feeling down or I was feeling yeah like negative emotions coming up to be like oh awareness, right? Oh,
Hmm.
interesting. This is I see the cloud coming in the horizon, right? But it became more and more like if you're in a sunny day and you see a cloud in the
Hmm.
distance and the cloud approaches, it's like, oh, like there's going to be some rain. But you're
Exactly.
not like, oh my God, like it's gonna be raining every day for the rest of my life. It's like, oh, we're good. Like there's
Absolutely.
gonna be a little bit of rain. It's gonna stop,
Uh-huh.
and then it's gonna be sunny again. Like it's gonna be fine, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the biggest things I've gotten out of all these things in general, manifestation, spirituality, all these teachings, just this coming into the awareness, I guess, that we are not our mind. And even if something
Mhm.
comes from a very like authoritative source, like I know, when people are diagnosed with something, it can seem like this is just going to be your identity, like this is just going to be like a life sentence.
Right.
And just recognizing that yes, you may be experiencing depression, you may be experiencing anxiety, but that is not who you are. That is not like your sole identity. And there's
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not your nature, it's not your essence.
exactly.
I think I'm lagging.
um for a second, yes.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, there's a really good YouTube channel, Zachary Hickory, and he talks about how
Okay.
he has a video about how he had OCD, or he was diagnosed with OCD.
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
during his childhood, this was just like such a huge part of his life. And washing his hands 100 times a day, like to the point where they were bleeding, and it just really kind of
Oh wow.
dominated his thoughts all the time. And yeah, it just kind of coming to going to all these different therapists, and they kind of helped to manage the symptoms, but that was basically all they could do. They told him this is just something you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life. And
Hmm.
really, I think the
Yeah.
way he described it was just kind of hitting rock bottom, and then just deciding this is not who I am. And yeah, just choose, just recognizing that yes, these may be symptoms, but this is not my identity.
Hmm. Sure. I might lose you for a second. I'll try to throw this on my LTE.
But yeah, that's definitely very powerful what you shared. And like you said, I think too, when we have like a family history of something, like for instance, like if you have a family history of cancer, I think definitely, yeah, some people may feel like
Ah,
it's almost
all right.
inevitable that they'll follow like in the same tracks. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
yeah, so I think that's really where these teachings to me are like the most powerful. It's just kind of recognizing that you're bigger than all of
Hmm.
this, so that you don't need,
100%.
yeah, that you don't need, you can experience these different things, but you're not defined by any of these
Hmm.
experiences.
Yeah. That's also part of the reasons why, well, two things. I'm super grateful not to have been diagnosed with anything
Hmm.
being young, because um, like I'm not saying it's always unhelpful to have a diagnosis. Sometimes it
Hmm.
very much is. Um, but it's more complex than that. And especially now that I have studied psychology, and that's another reason why I quit, is I you study the placebo effect, obviously, in psychology.
Hmm.
That's another thing that's super interesting.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like it took me a while to even notice it, but then I was like, wait a minute, like. we have to account for this effect where if people believe they're being cured, they are cured.
Hmm.
So we maybe investigate that a little bit. Like that sounds pretty interesting to me.
Yeah.
Probably no profit in it, but like hell,
Yeah.
like it's massive. But anyways,
Totally.
and so I was like, I can see how it can be very harmful to assign a tag to someone
Hmm.
to which is essentially that's what a diagnostic is. You when you give them an apple like a appellation, you stick something next to their name,
Hmm.
like Raphaël Paquette, artist, right? Like Raphaël
Exactly.
Paquette, OCD, Raphaël Paquette,
Hmm.
whatever. Um, and you start identifying with that. So again, you feel like if these things go, you lose part of yourself, even if it's subconscious, and even if consciously you're like, I want to get rid of these things, but deep in your subconscious, you're also afraid because you're identified with these things. So it means death in a way. So you want to avoid it, which is strange, but that is like how it is. And yeah, you've along with the thing with like the constructed memories and the placebo effect and all of that, you can definitely see how if you're told like this is what you are and this is how your life is going to go and this is what's going to happen to you in order and blah blah, and you believe these statements, then it will probably happen to you.
Hmm.
But it seems also that if you don't believe these things, there's a higher chance they won't happen to you.
Hmm.
So then there's the obvious ethical question of should you diagnose anyone,
Yeah,
right? Especially in
absolutely.
psychology.
Hmm.
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying it's a real question.
Hmm.
Is it helpful at all?
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I've thought about that also. And yeah, it's I think that's why, there's really not one size fits all. That,
Yeah.
like you said, I think some people might find it helpful to have the label, like
Mhm.
it gives them more clarity. But yeah, I could definitely see situations where, yeah, that label just kind of ends up becoming a life sentence.
Right. I think sometimes it's potentially more helpful socially in the sense that if you're, pardon my French, if you're really, really weird and nobody understands why you're weird or they feel like you're just
Uh-huh.
super inadequate, right? Like, well, maybe it's helpful in your lived experience if when someone is about to flip for something, someone is like, wait, uh he's autistic. Like this is
Exactly.
why like he won't look at you in the eyes and blah blah
Hmm.
blah. Then instead of getting angry or frustrated, that person will be like, "Oh, okay, go on with your day,"
Totally.
right?
For sure.
So, like in that way, it's pretty obvious it can be super helpful.
Hmm.
Um, the thing I'm not sure about, and I was thinking a lot about that last month. I kind of binged Doctor House for a little bit, and they give those diagnoses to these people. And it's like it's important for them to develop the ability of being blunt and bringing bad news to people.
Hmm.
Uh, as a doctor, like you have to be able to tell someone like there's no use if you believe someone is dying, there's no use not telling them. And then you're like, oh, like don't worry, it's like it's gonna be
Hmm.
great. And then like 3 weeks later, you're like, actually, you have like 2 hours to live. I'm sorry I hid it from you. Like,
Hmm.
well, I was hoping I would find a solution, but I
Yeah.
didn't find a solution. So,
Yeah.
all right, it's
For sure.
inadequate, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but then there's also like when you read Joe Dispenza's work, like you see all of these situations where like people were proclaimed basically walking dead,
Hmm.
and like you're gonna die super soon. and or you're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, or you're going to be bedridden for the rest of your life, or stuff like that. And then they change their attitude and they change who they are psychologically, and that changes who they are physically and
Mhm.
genetically, right? It makes you think a lot about the effects of diagnosis, and that maybe we're using diagnosis a little bit recklessly, right?
Mhm.
Which can be forgiven because we didn't know. But now that
Yeah.
we know more and
Mhm.
more, like I think there's a new conversation to be had around sticking labels on people.
Absolutely, for sure. And I mean, even doctors and scientists will, admit that they're never 100% certain, or
Oh
there's
yeah.
there's still a lot of gray area.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. The good ones, at least. Honest.
Exactly.
The honest ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, nobody knows it all.
Exactly. And that's actually
And
given me a lot of peace, really, just admitting that I don't know it all and I don't have to know it all.
yeah, right? I think it's probably some Greek guy that said that, like um but I'll say it in the words of Canaan from Africa. And every man who knows a thing knows he knows not a damn thing at all. Mhm. It's sort of the idea that the more you know that you don't know, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
That's an interesting one too. And it's so true.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I'm gonna have to go soon, but do you wanna I have like 10 more minutes if you wanna
All right.
touch on any subject or
Is there anything that you would like to mention?
hmm, good question. I'd say hoping that someone that needs maybe this perspective will listen to this. I found it's very important to treat life, achievement, fulfillment, and whatever is important to you as a marathon and not as a race, in the sense that whatever actions you take and whatever path you decide to follow, you have to do it in a sustainable way, in a way that you can keep giving to that idea, project, desire daily, without getting exhausted, tired, or discouraged or beat up. And that is also part of the help I have found in, um, for lack of a better word, I think it's a good word, a positive mental attitude, right? The the true and wise positive mental attitude will allow you to keep going when things are hard because you decide that they're not really hard, right? Like, or hard doesn't have the same sense for you. And
Exactly.
if they are
Hmm.
hard, they're not too hard.
Hmm.
And you don't know if they're good or bad. And you don't know where they'll lead you next, but you know at some point they'll lead you at your destination. So to keep that ethos of to really take it seriously, to make sure that the things that are in your life are things that can stay in your life for the long term and that you're going to be good with them. If I can be more concrete, I would think about a business setting or a professional setting. For me, for example, I had to learn to say no to certain projects or clients. Um, and I also had to learn to fire some clients. Like
Hmm.
we're not working together anymore. because I can't, if if I look at a client and I think, how would I feel if all of my clients were like that guy? And I'd be like, well, I wouldn't be in this business anymore, right? Then I don't take the client on, or I fire the client if I have to, right? And that has made, like, I can't even tell you how massive of a difference it's made because it's on so many levels. Like, I work less hours, I make more money, and I'm happier. So, I mean, what can you ask for more than that,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And that was by removing the unpleasant things
Mhm,
and also maybe a little touch of not discounting the things that I loved, right?
mhm.
And you probably understand that very well because you're an artist, you do cultural stuff, right?
Totally.
And I think it's a reflex for a lot of artists to discount their work
Mhm.
for many reasons. One of them is a reason that's pretty universal, in my opinion, is if you enjoy something, you don't think it's worth a lot.
Mhm.
And usually, if you're going to be an artist and you're going to like really devote your life to it or make it a big part of your life, it's because you enjoy it, right?
For sure.
So naturally, you're going to discount whatever you're doing
Mhm.
because you like it. And to understand that what you hate to do and you think is super valuable, and you're like, oh, I got to do this and then people will pay me,
Mhm.
is something that someone else loves to do. And they're like, I can't believe I'm being paid to do that. Right. But they're
Mhm.
probably not doing that because they're like, I can't believe this is worth anything. And they're doing the thing you love to do, but they hate to do because they're like, I
Yeah.
feel good about being paid about that because it's hard and
Uh-huh.
shitty. And
Yeah.
work should be hard and shitty, right? So yeah, stop deciding for other people. Accept that what you love is useful to other people and very valuable, and they don't want to do it, and they'd much rather you do it for them for a
Mhm.
price, right? And that price can be really high, like or really low. Like it really doesn't matter. That's not the point, you know. But the value can be whatever because, yeah, I've said
That
enough, I
is
think.
that is huge. That is just massive. And really, like what I take away from that is that in the end, like you're the one that's in charge. Like
Mhm.
you're the CEO of your world. And so you get
Mhm.
to call the shots, and yeah, you don't have to put up with things that you don't want to. I've certainly had experiences, thankfully not too many. Most of my clients have been very pleasant to work with, but definitely had
Mhm.
experiences in the past where I would take on something just because I was desperate for money,
Yeah.
and it would never be a good situation. and
Mhm.
and the thing is that you could call it I am, or your awareness, like it goes with you wherever you go, and so you might as well just cultivate a good relationship with that, and just make sure that only you can live your life, and so
Yeah,
it might as
I
well
agree.
be a life that you enjoy. Like all these other things of the world, like they're always going to be changing, but that's the one
Mhm.
thing that never changes. So that's where your priority, that's where your focus should be.
Yeah. So it's a almost brings us back to the whole strength to change what I can and courage to accept what I cannot thing, right?
Exactly.
And then there's the clairvoyance to see um, what you can change and what you cannot, to tell the difference, the discernment, right?
Absolutely. For
Mm,
sure. And
yeah,
is there somewhere where people can find out more about you?
that's a good question. I My YouTube channel is kind of dead right now. It's Raphaël Paquette Montréal Immobilier. So it's really just a Montreal real estate channel and it's in
Mhm.
French. You can definitely check it out. I think the videos are pretty good, but I haven't posted in about a year. Um, and yeah, you can check me out on Facebook for sure. I'm on Facebook, Raphaël Paquette. And no, that's really it. I'm realizing now that I'm saying this to you that I'm unfindable on the web right now. Probably should remedy that.
put all your information in the description below this video so
Sweet.
people can find you. And then
Yeah,
if
that sounds
you,
good. I have a link tree, so maybe we'll put that
oh,
in and
perfect.
then it can
Perfect.
evolve, I can add or
Exactly.
remove links. That's very practical. Shout out to
Yes,
link tree.
definitely. All right, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. That was awesome.
Yes, this was super
Yeah, it
fun.
was a very good conversation. It's
Yes,
cool where you can go and you just let it flow, eh?
absolutely.
Mm.